Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Ramana Kendra's Delhi Satsang, Sunday Satsang. I shall now request Narayananji to initiate the puja. Narayananji.
ओम अच्युताय नमः, ओम आनंदाय नमः, ओम गोविंदाय नमः। शुक्लां वरदरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्याये सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। अयं मूर्तसमूसर्दोस्तु बन्धो बान्धवनो क्रनन्दो अयं मूर्तसमूसर्दोस्तु तदेव लग्नं सदिनं तदेव ताराबलं चन्द्रनं तदेव विद्याबलं दैवबलं तदेव लक्ष्मीपदे ते तेङ्ग्रीं स्मरामि। ओम भो ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सोदरवर्णीयम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओमाप ज्योतिषमृतं ब्रह्मोत्सरम् समोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वाराशि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम करिष्यमाणस्य कर्मणः निर्वहन प्रसक्तम माधव विघ्नेश पूजां कर्ष्ये। पृथ्व्यां मेरु तुलसी सूर्यं चंद्रकर्म देवता पृथ्वी दिया त्रिदा लोकादितं विष्णुना त्रिदा त्वं स तारे मां देवी त्वं गुरुदासनम् आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षासां खण्डार्वं करां यादव देवदवानलाञ्जनम् ममोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वाराशि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम निर्बंध सिद्ध्यर्थम माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजां कर्ष्ये। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं अवामहे कविं कवीनां सूत्रमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदे आनुशृणु श्रीसाधनम् अस्मिन् हरिद्राबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवामयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः औपचारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आचमनं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातमक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थमक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धां धारयामि समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरियक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः अलङ्करणार्थमक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्रा कुङ्कुमं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि। ओम सुमुगाय नमः। ओम एकदन्ताय नमः। ओम कपिलाय नमः। ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः। ओम लंबोदराय नमः। ओम विकटाय नमः। ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः। ओम विनायकाय नमः। ओम धूमकेतवे नमः। ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः। ओम बालचंद्राय नमः। ओम गजाननाय नमः। ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः। ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः। ओम हेरंबाय नमः। ओम स्कंदपूर्जवाय नमः। ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः। ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकरे नमः। ओम आतुपुरविनायकरे नमः। ओम महागणपतिये नमः नानाविधपरिमलपत्रपुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवी सविता प्रसव सत्यं दौर्देन प्रसंजामि अमृतत्वं स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम अपानाय स्वाहा। ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा। उदानाय स्वाहा। ओम समानाय स्वाहा। ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। उडगंड कदलीपळ निवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोपसां सूत्रावसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगं अवामहे कविं कवीनामस्त्रं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदे आनुष्ठुनं तुलसीदासनं महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि। महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय भूयकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। भगवती प्रसादं सरसा कृणामि। ओम भो ओम भो ओम सु ओम महंज ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सुतर्भवण्यम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम ज्योतिर्समृद्धमुर्मुसुरम् ओम पात समस्त दुर्द शतवारासि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय प्रार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे वादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगात्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभादिनां षष्ठ्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये सुभद्रतुनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे वसंत ऋतु मेष मासे शुक्लपक्षे अष्टमी तिथियां सुमतितो भानुवासरयुक्तायाम् आश्लेष नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभयोग शुभकर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायाम् अस्याम् अष्टमी तिथियां सुमतितो मम जन्मापाप जन्मप्रतिहर्षणपर्यन्तं मध्ये संभावितानं सर्वेषां भावनं सत्य अवनोदनार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुटुम्बानं क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यणाम अभिवृद्धिं समस्त मंगलाब्ध्यर्थं समस्त दुर्गोपशान्त्यार्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदंगं कलश पूजां स करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि शोभनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुखण्डे रुद्रसमाधिर्थ मूले तत्र सिद्धित्वा ब्रह्मा मातृगणे समृद्धा कुशौ तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तत्वा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो पदर्वण गंगे च सैन्यस्य गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु अंगैः सहिता सर्वे कलशाम्बु समाचिर्ता आयान्तु देव पूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा ओम बोरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णु विष्णुकरे देवस्य पूजिते पति जांजने नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय पुक्त जीव देव स्नान अंजान निर्माल्यं स्वयं मौने पूजयेत्। ओम सकल गुणात्मशक्तियुक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिगुरुमाय नमः आनंदाय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दशदिग्बालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अस्य श्री प्राणविष्टमन्दस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरिकिजिसामधर्माणि सन्नांसि सकल जगत्सि सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम किलगम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंगर्जनेभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिकाभ्यां नमः हरिंगष्टिकाभ्यां नमः रोम कर्णपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं सरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वसट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्वरम दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोलस तरुणस्वर कराब्चे पासम गोदंडम इक्षुत मणिगुण पंचबाणा विप्राणस कपालम तरेसुदापि नवसरोट्या देवी बाला गौना बहुसुदरी प्राणशक्ति परान ओम माम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम अम यम लम लम हम नम नम हम सत् सोहम सोहम हम स अस्यामुतो जीवतिष्ठुतो अस्यामुतो सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस सस्सोत्र दिव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद वायुमुस्तानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखं सुरं दृष्टंदु स्वाहा। ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठामन्त्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरिकिजि सामधर्माणि सन्नांसि सकल जगत्सृष्टि सति सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठाभिनय विनियोग आमंगुष्टाभ्यां नमः हरिन्द्रजनिभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आमनाभिभ्यां नमः हरिमष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करलपृष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम इन्द्रियाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम श्रीगाय विसटाम कौसायं हरिं नेत्रदाय विसट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट्पूर्व दिग्बंध असुने दे पुनर्स्मात् सक्ष पुनः प्राणमे नोय दे भोगम योपस्य में सूर्य मुच्चग्न मनमदेवण्या सत्ति अवायुधो भव सद्दाविदो भव सन्निधो भव सन्निधो भव अवगुणिदो भव सुब्रतो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजा अवसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन बिम्बेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमो नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः श्री कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नोदिमंदन पौलसी पुत्रपः लक्ष्मी प्रसीमानंद प्रिय ईश्वर चतुर्नोदिमंदन पौलसी पुत्रपः लक्ष्मी प्रसीमानंद प्रिय ईश्वर चतुर्नोदिमंदन पौलसी पुत्रपः लक्ष्मी प्रसीमानंद प्रिय ईश्वर Recite Ramana Stotram now. He Gurubhyo Namaha, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheswara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Sai Gurave Namaha, Abhara Satchi Sugvari, Ashor Yashor Mimatram Bonam Samastam, Unayidam Tam Ramnam Gaviram, Sindavinam Nirdisindayami, Om, Oho Sena Maham Sena Bhataya Namaha, Om Sri Ramanaya Namaha, Om Gurave Namaha, ओम अगंड संविदागराय नमः ओम औजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत्तिदावदाराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तलोतिदाय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोतंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरात्तवफलाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयायाम्बा सयायवते नमः ओम शोणासुल मौलीरमानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्तमास्त्रे लप्त विद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रभुत्वाय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृप्रदान्वेषिणे नमः ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः ओम पितरादेस्त सोनशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तपोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम महोत्साहाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः ओम शांतसंकल्प संभवाय नमः ओम सुसुंदृसे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तपस्विद सर्वंगाय नमः ओम उल्लाम्बोज विलोचनाय नमः ओम चंद्रिका सिदाससी मंडिदान मंडलाय नमः ओम सूदवाट्याम समासीनाय नमः ओम सूर्यनिदाखिल विप्रमाय नमः ओम वेद वेदांत तत्पत्नाय नमः ओम चिन्मुत्ने नमः ओम त्रिगुणादिगाय नमः ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः ओम विराजत सलागुरुदिये नमः ओम उच्चित्तनयनाय नमः ओम पूर्णाय नमः ओम रसिदास तांडवाय नमः ओम गंभीराय नमः ओम परमाचार्याय नमः ओम सुब्रसन्याय नमः ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः ओम धीराय नमः ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः ओम स्वराजे नमः ओम महर्षिये नमः ओम भगवते नमः ओम ईट्याय नमः ओम भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः ओम विमलाय नमः ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः ओम आप्ताय नमः ओम ऋजुमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः ओम समत्रुसे नमः ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः ओम सत्याय नमः ओम प्रसादाय नमः ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः ओम सुकुमाराय नमः ओम सदानंदाय नमः ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः ओम दयार्णवाय नमः ओम श्री सोणातुल युरुद्भूत स्कंदासल निकेतनाय नमः ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टने नमः ओम सद्भक्तवृंद परिबुद्धाय नमः ओम गणेश मुनि प्रियं सेवितां किशोरुवाय नमः ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि गंगा संचिन्न संशयाय नमः ओम वर्णासन मुदादिताय नमः ओम रसज्ञाय नमः ओम सौम्याय नमः ओम आत्मबुधे नमः ओम सर्वावनिमनस्थानामारात्याय नमः ओम सर्वसद्गुणे नमः ओम आत्मारामाय नमः ओम महाभागाय नमः ओम मातृमुक्तिविदायकाय नमः ओम विनदाय नमः ओम विनुदाय नमः ओम मित्राय नमः ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः ओम भावगोद्बलाय नमः ओम दर्शनाधिक सम्माने नमः ओम मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः ओम मृत्यान्तिकर्षानित्याय नमः ओम स्मरणात्मोचकाय नमः ओम अंधस्मिरचण्डांसवे नमः ओम संसारार्मतारकाय नमः ओम सोनादिश्रीदिष्टरे नमः ओम आर्तविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः ओम अविच्युत निजप्रज्ञाय नमः ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः ओम कमंडलधराय नमः ओम सुब्रगविनिवसनाय नमः ओम दुहाय नमः ओम दंडवाणीय नमः ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः ओम पौरोगपिशक्वराय नमः ओम स्कंदाय नमः ओम देवदमाय नमः ओम अमर्त्याय नमः ओम सेनानिये नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री वल्ली देवाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री स्वामीनाथाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। नमो भगवते श्री नटराजरे नमः। नमो भगवते श्री भैरवरे नमः। नमो भगवते श्री नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री शिव पार्वतीये नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। I will recite Upadesa Saram. कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलं कर्मजिह्वरं कर्मदज्जडं प्रहृतिमहदधौ पदनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गदनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं सिद्धशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुद्यमं भूजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैषधी युग्धसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उद्यमस्तव दुर्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जव ज्ञानमुद्यमम् आद्यधारया श्रोदशासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावना सौवमित्यसौ भावनाभिदा भावनीमदा भावशून्यसत् भावसुस्तुति भावनाभरा भक्तिरुद्गमा तिरुस्तरे मन स्वस्थताग्रिया भक्तियोग बोधाचरिष्ठिरम् आयुरोदना प्रीयते मन जालभक्षिव क्रोधसाधनं सिद्धवायव चित्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्वयी शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदम्बुना भवदिनो मृदं प्राणवन्दना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो विष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन सित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अमयं कुदो भवति चिरवद ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनासभात् अहमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिख्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अव्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसेकस तज्जडं सस सत्ववासिगा चित्ववेदरा तद्दया इति सिद्धयाय ईसजीवयो वेषदीबिदा सस्वभावदो वस्तु केवलं येषानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईसदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपद आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्द्वया आत्मनिष्ठदा ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानमस्ति ज्ञाधुमन्धरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा अपूर्णसित्सुखम् अन्धमुक्त्यदि तम्बरं सुखं विन्ददीयै वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निजविभानकं महतितं तवो रमणवाग्यं महतितं तवो रमणवाग्यं महतितं तवो रमणवाग्यम् अरुणाचल अरुणाचल नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणा रमणा रमणा.
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to everyone for the Satsang from Delhi Ramana Kendra. We shall continue our session on Asaram with Mr. Michael James. Let me just switch over. Right. He has been addressing us since January, and this shall continue for every verse. Just a quick brief background about the genesis of Saram. As per the legend, there was a group of wayward rishis of Daruka forest who were practicing special rites for attaining powers they so desired. By the same means, they hoped to attain final liberation. However, they were mistaken, for action can only result in action. Rituals can produce powers, but not peace of liberation. Rishis then realized they were up against one more powerful than themselves and bowed down to him for instruction. Their egos deflated by Shiva, and perceiving the error of their approach, they humbly sought spiritual instruction from Shiva. Shiva graciously bestowed the instruction, and it is these teachings that Muruganar requested Sri Bhagwan to reveal in verse form. So the Maharshi composed 30 verses in Tamil. Later, Sri Bhagwan translated them into Sanskrit. Mr. Michael James has been addressing us for the last 1.5 years. I don't think I would need to go into a detailed introduction. Just a very brief one. His association with Bhagwan Sri Raman Maharishi's ashram has been since 1976, where he stayed for over 20 years. He is now based in London, where he regularly discusses Bhagwan's teachings with fellow devotees via email and Zoom. Mr. Michael James addresses devotees of Raman Kendra, Delhi, every second Sunday of the month. Sir.
Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 16 of Asaram. As I had explained earlier, verses, well, the first two verses are about karma. Then from verses 3 to 10 or 3 to 9 is about the path of bhakti. 10 is a summation of all the paths. 11 to 15 is about the path of yoga. From verse 16 onwards, we come to the real teachings of Bhagavan, the real core teachings of Bhagavan, which is the path of jnana, which is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti, as he made clear in verse 8 of Upadeshundya, where he said, better than taking God to be something other than ourselves and meditating on him or worshipping him accordingly, meditating on him as not other than ourselves, with the understanding that he is I, that is best of all. That is the most purifying of all the practices. So the path of bhakti culminates in this path of vichara. So this path of vichara is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. Without bhakti, we cannot, we wouldn't even be inclined to come to this path. This is the path of complete self-surrender. So Bhagavan begins to talk about that from verse 16. In verses 11 to 15, or rather 11 to 14 to be more precise, he's talking, because 15 is like he's summarizing, and he's actually talking about the final goal rather than the path. In verses 11 to 14, he shows how the path of yoga can lead only to laya. If the path of yoga on its own can lead only to laya. In order to bring about nasa, before allowing the mind to subside in laya, we need to send it on the one path, the path of investigation, or ekachintana, as he says in Sanskrit, thought of the one. The one means the one that actually exists, namely Atma-swarupa, our own real nature. So he shows there how the path of yoga can lead to this. It can lead to this path, but in itself, it is not a complete path in itself. Yoga, as Patanjali defined it at the beginning of Yoga Sutra, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. That means yoga is withdrawing the mind. Yoga is curbing the mental activity. We curb the mental activity by withdrawing the mind from other things. But merely withdrawing the mind from other things is not sufficient, because every night when we fall asleep, our mind is withdrawn from everything else, and we thereby fall asleep. But that is only manolaya, that is not manonasa. In order to bring about manonasa, it's not sufficient. It's necessary to withdraw the mind from everything else, but it's not sufficient. In order to bring about manonasa, the attention not only needs to be withdrawn from other things, it needs to be focused keenly on ourselves. That is what Bhagavan is implying here in this 16th verse. I'll first read the Tamil version, because the Tamil version is particularly clear. The Tamil version begins with an adverbial clause. Adverbial clause means it's just a subsidiary clause. It's not the main point. So the adverbial clause is veli videyangale vittu. Veli means external. Videyangale means, videyam is a Tamil form of a Sanskrit word Vishaya. So videyangale means Vishayas, plural. So vittu means leaving or letting go of. So giving up all external phenomena, or leaving aside all external phenomena. And then the main clause is manam tan oliuru ordale unme unichiam. The subject is manam tan oliuru ordale. That means the mind knowing its own form of light. That alone is unme unichi, is true awareness, real awareness, or awareness of reality. We can take that away, but it amounts to the same thing. That is, being aware of what is real awareness. And real awareness means being aware only of what is real, and what is real is only awareness, as he clarifies later in verse 23. So, but as I say, the main clause here is he's saying the mind knowing its own form of light. Its own form of light means the light of pure awareness that is ever shining in the mind as I. That is what we need to know. Knowing that alone is real awareness. When we focus our whole attention on ourself alone, on our form of light, we are thereby withdrawing our attention from other things. But if we merely withdraw our attention from other things without focusing it on ourself, a form of light, we will subside in laya. So that's why Bhagavan puts veli videngale vittu as an adverbial clause. The main clause is manam, the mind knowing its own form of light is true awareness. The Sanskrit is a very, very close translation of this. What he says in the Sanskrit is drisya bharitam. Drisya bharitam means kept back from drisya, from what is seen. That is means the same as veli videngale vittu. Chittam Atmanaha Chitva Darshanam. The mind, Chittam, seeing Darshanam, its own consciousness, its own nature as consciousness. Atmanaha Chittam, Chitva, sorry. That is Tattva Darshanam. That is seeing what is real. So the meaning of the whole verse is kept back from what is seen. That means the mind kept back from what is seen. The mind seeing its own awareness or its own knowingness is seeing what is real. So the mind seeing its own chitva is tattva darshanam. This verse, if we read it in the light of the Tamil verse, it's very, very clear that this is what it means. However, not everyone, even learned people who know Sanskrit very well, have misinterpreted this verse because not understanding Bhagavan's teachings clearly. That is, it has been misinterpreted by some very learned people as the mind kept back from Drisya is knowing Chitva, is knowing its own Chitva. That is Tattva Darshanam. That is a misinterpretation because that implies that keeping the mind away from Drisya is itself sufficient to see Chitva, and seeing Chitva is seeing the reality. That is not what Bhagavan means, because keeping the mind back from Drisya on its own is the path of yoga. That is yoga's chitta-vritti nirodha. That is chitta-vritti nirodha means keeping the attention away from all other things. But that is not sufficient. That's why Bhagavan puts that as an adverbial clause. The main clause is the mind seeing its own chitva is tattva darshanam. So it's very important, but that's why the Sanskrit is written in a very terse way. Since learned people have misinterpreted it, I assume that the Sanskrit gives room for such misinterpretation, but that is not what Bhagavan means. So we need to understand correctly what Bhagavan means. That's why to understand any of Bhagavan's teachings, we need to understand them in the context of his whole teaching. If we take a verse out of context and without knowing the other teachings of Bhagavan, we may misinterpret it. But if we know all of Bhagavan's teachings, we will clearly know Bhagavan taught that merely withdrawing the mind from other things can at best lead only to laya, but laya is useless. Laya is just like sleep. We don't get any benefit. Even if you go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years, as Bhagavan told the story of a yogi who, by the practice of yoga, he was able to go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for a prolonged period of time. Once he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi so deeply that he remained in that state for 300 years. When he woke up, the first thing he asked for was the last thing he had asked for before going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, namely water. So Bhagavan explained that when even the most superficial thought in his mind was not destroyed, in spite of remaining in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years, what about all the deeply embedded vasanas? It's obvious they obviously cannot be destroyed. Just like vasanas are not destroyed in sleep, they're not destroyed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But vasanas can be destroyed only in waking and dream by our fixing our attention on our own chitva, on our own awareness. That means on our fundamental awareness, I am. Because when we fix our attention on I am, we are refraining from allowing ourselves to be swayed by our Vishaya vasanas, which are our inclinations to attend to other things. So long as we have inclinations to attend, so long as we allow ourselves to attend to other things, we are feeding those inclinations. When we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by those inclinations, we are thereby strengthening the Satvasana, the inclination just to attend to our own being, and weakening the Vishaya Vasana, the inclination to attend to anything else. So this can be achieved only in the waking state, and it can be achieved most effectively by this simple practice of self-investigation. So what Bhagavan teaches us in this verse, he's teaching us as in so many verses, he's teaching us here the practice of self-investigation. What is the practice of self-investigation? Obviously, in order to investigate ourselves, we need to withdraw our mind from other things. But merely withdrawing our mind from other things is not sufficient. We need to focus our attention on ourselves. So we can forget about other things. We don't even have to worry about withdrawing our mind from other things. All we need to be concerned about is focusing our attention on ourselves. Because to the extent we focus our attention on ourselves, we are thereby automatically withdrawing it from other things. This is why Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nana, Etane enangul erinomena. However many thoughts arise, so what? So Bhagavan doesn't want us to be concerned about thoughts. He doesn't want us to try to prevent the thoughts. He doesn't want us to engage in chittabritti nirodha. All he says is, forget about thoughts, attend to yourself. If you attend to yourself, unknowingly, you're automatically withdrawing your attention from everything else, because you can't, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby withdrawing our attention from other things. So all Bhagavan was concerned about, he wasn't concerned about thoughts, he wasn't concerned about anything. He was concerned that we should attend to ourselves to the extent possible. The more we attend to ourselves, the more our attention is automatically withdrawn from other things. That's why he put this this drisya bharitam, kept back from what is seen, well, I don't know grammatically, I don't know how it stands in Sanskrit. In Tamil, the equivalent is an adverbial clause. I imagine it means more or less the same. It's more or less an adverbial clause in Sanskrit, kept back from what is seen. That is, the mind has to be kept back from what is seen. How is it kept back from what is seen? By its merely seeing its own knowingness, by seeing its own chitva, it is thereby being kept back from other things. Because if we attend to ourselves, we're not attending to the extent we attend to ourselves, we are not attending to other things. So here, Bhagavan, this verse 16, this is the beginning of Bhagavan's description of the path of jnana. This is a very compact and a very complete description of what is the practice. It is simply a matter of keeping our attention, of focusing our attention on ourselves and thereby withdrawing it from other things. That is all that is required. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby seeing what we actually are. That's why, and when we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we actually see when we see ourselves as we actually are, that is seeing, that is tattva darshan, that is seeing what is real. What is tattva? Tattva is a very interesting word. Tattva literally means, tattva literally means thatness. So thatness implies what actually exists or is real. In different systems of philosophy, they have different, they enumerate different tattvas, that is basic ontological principles. In Sankhya, there are, I don't know, some 24 tattvas. In some other systems of philosophy, in Kashmir Shaivism, some 36 or something. I don't know. Every system of philosophy has its own classification of how many tattvas there are. According to Bhagavan, there is one tattva and one tattva alone. As he says in Asaram, in verse 43 of Aksharamlai, he says, Tane tattvam. Tan means oneself. Tane is an intensified form of oneself, so it means oneself alone. So tane, we can either take it to mean, for further stress, he's saying oneself alone is the reality, or we can take it to mean oneself alone is oneself. That is the reality. But whichever way we take it, it amounts to the same. According to Bhagavan, there is only one tattva, and that is ourself. Tattva means reality, what is real. The only thing that is real is ourself. And then he goes on in this verse of Asaram life, this verse 43, to say, Idane tane kartavai arunachala. You yourself reveal this to me. That is in the first sentence, tane tane. Tane is referring to ourselves. Here, tane, in the second sentence, is referring to arunachala, because tan can refer to either the first person, second person, or third person. So in the first sentence, it's referring to our own self. We ourselves are the reality. And who is to reveal this to us? Arunachala himself is to reveal this to us. And he reveals this to us because he himself is that tattva. He's always shining in our heart as I. So by shining in our heart as I, and drawing our mind inwards to see himself, he thereby reveals himself as the reality, as our own self. That's why in the next verse he goes on to say, Bhagavan in the next verse, verse 44 of Asaram Life, Bhagavan reveals to us what Arunachala taught him. But Arunachala obviously didn't teach him words, because Arunachala is in the form of a mountain. Arunachala teaches in silence. So, so what Arunachala taught Bhagavan in silence, because we are too dull to listen to that silence teaching that is ever going on in our heart, Bhagavan translated it into simple human language for us. That is what Arunachala taught him is Tirumbi aham. That means turning within. Tane dinam ahakankan. Seeing yourself daily. That means constantly with the inner eye. So seeing ourselves daily is what he refers to in this verse as manam tanoli uruodale, mind knowing its own form of life or light, or chitva darshanam. Sorry, chittam atmanaha chitva darshanam. The mind seeing its own form of consciousness. That's what he's referring to here, is seeing ourselves with the inner eye. Terium, it will be known. So if we are constantly turning our attention within to see who am I, then this truth will be revealed. Endranayan Arunachala. Thus you said, my Arunachala. So what Arunachala taught Bhagavan in silence, Bhagavan taught us in words. But what that teaching is, we must turn our attention back within and see ourselves constantly. That is what is implied in this 16th verse of Upadesha Saram. The mind seeing its own chitva. That means the mind turning within to face its own fundamental awareness, I am. That is seeing what is real, because that chitva is itself tattva. It's the only thing that is real. The fundamental awareness, I am, that is what is actually real. So this is the path that Bhagavan taught us. It's very, very simple. We simply need to withdraw our attention from other things and focus our attention on ourselves. But in order to do so, we need all-consuming love. So love is the key to success in this path. Are there any questions, or should I go on to talk about other verses?
Michael, there is a question from Mr. Sanjay Lohia. I shall read the question. Quote,
yes.
Is there any distinction between karma vasana and Vishai vasana? Unquote.
Vasana means inclination. Karma vasana therefore means inclination to do actions. Why do we do actions? What is it that drives us to do actions? All effort of all jivas is for one thing and one thing alone. We are all, as Bhagavan made clear in the first paragraph of Nana, we are all seeking happiness. The one thing that motivates all our efforts is our desire for happiness. However, we wrongly believe happiness is our happiness or misery is caused by external circumstances. So we think, if I achieve this, if I get this, then I'll be happy. If I avoid that, I'll be happy. So our attention is going outwards, believing the source of happiness is outside ourselves. That is where we go wrong. Happiness is our own real nature. So we can find happiness only in our heart. So all our actions are driven by our love for happiness, our love to be happy. And the reason we do actions means of mind, speech, and body. Why do we do actions of mind, speech, and body? Because we think, we believe, but if we get this or that, if I acquire more knowledge, I'll be happier. If I study all of Vedanta and I become an expert in Vedanta, or if I study nuclear physics and become an expert in that, by acquiring more knowledge, I'll be happy. Some people believe. Other people believe, but they can find happiness by. Some people, for example, they enjoy singing. They find fulfillment in singing. So by action of speech, they are seeking happiness. Or some people like to give long lectures. So they find happiness in giving long lectures. Other people seek happiness in material things. So for that, you need to work. You need to do actions of body to accumulate wealth. So all our actions, whatever the actions may be, they are all driven by our search for happiness. So because we believe happiness lies in Vishayas, we do actions to acquire those Vishayas, but we think will contribute to our happiness, and to avoid those Vishayas, but we think will make us unhappy. So the driving force behind every karma is a Vishaya Vasana. So we can explain the relationship between karma vasana and Vishaya vasanas in various ways. We can say, for example, the karma vasana is like the outer shell, and the heart of that, the outer shell of a nut. The inside of the nut, the kernel, is the Vishaya Vasana. That's one way of describing it, because it is, but within every karma vasana, there's a Vishaya Vasana, because we do karma seeking Vishayas. But the simplest way of all to say it is that it's just a different way of describing the same thing. That is, the Vishaya Vasanas manifest as karma vasanas, because the Vishayas, because of our inclination to experience Vishayas, prompts us to do actions in order to experience those Vishayas. So really, karma vasanas and Vishaya vasanas, in effect, they are the same. Or even if you take them as slightly different, they are inseparable. That is, so long as we have Vishaya Vasanas, the Vishaya Vasanas prompt us to do actions. So really they are the same. It's simplest to take them as the same, because can we distinguish the inclination to enjoy a certain pleasure from the inclination to do an action to enjoy that pleasure? If we want, we can distinguish them, but really they are indistinguishable. They're two sides of the same coin. So long as we have Vishaya Vasanas, those Vishaya Vasanas will manifest as karma vasanas. So truly speaking, there is no difference. It's the Vishaya Vasanas that makes the mind go out towards external things, towards Drisya. Our aim is to turn the mind back within. Turning the mind back within is not an action. It is a cessation of action. So we turn the mind back within under the sway of Sat Vasana, the liking to seek, the inclination to seek happiness in our own being, that is Sat Vasana. That is not a karma vasana. Vishaya vasanas are all karma vasanas. So if we are to follow Bhagavan's path, we are trying to turn our attention within to see our own chitva, our own oliyuru, our own form of light. In other words, that fundamental awareness I am. Turning our attention within thus is not an action, it is just being. Allowing our attention to go outwards towards towards Drisya, what is seen, or anything, any Vishaya, that is action. So I hope that clarifies the matter. In summary, essentially, Vishaya vasanas and karma vasanas are the same thing. It's just two different ways of describing the same thing. Because when we seek happiness in things other than ourselves, we can seek that happiness only by doing actions. So it's really not, they're inseparable. Just two ways of describing the same thing. I hope that answers that question adequately.
Thank you, sir. It does. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
There are none on either this platform or on YouTube, Michael. So you
okay, so I will go on then to the next verse. That is verse 17. This is also a very, very important verse. Again, I will read the Tamil version and then the Sanskrit version. What Bhagavan says in the Tamil version is, Manatin uruvei maravadu chaba manamenum ondrile undi para markum ne arkum idundi para. That means Manatin uruvei maravadu chaba means when one investigates the form of mind without forgetting. What does he mean here by the form of mind? Simplest way to explain it, in the previous verse, he talked about the mind knowing its own form of light. So we can take the form of mind here to mean the mind's form of light. Its form of light means its fundamental awareness, I am. That is, that's the easiest way to take it here. If we want to take it in a slightly grosser way, he explains in the next verse what is the form of the mind. The mind is nothing but thoughts. Of all the thoughts, the thought called I is the first thought. Therefore, what the mind essentially is the first thought I. So we can take Manatin Uruve to mean the first thought I, in other words, ego. But when we're investigating ego, ego is the mixed awareness, I am this body. What we are investigating is only the I am portion. As Bhagavan said, the essential chit element of ego we're investigating. So that is what he referred to in the previous verse as manam tan oli uru, the mind's own form of light, or chittam atmana chitva, the mind's own awareness. So that's what he's talking about here. When one investigates that, Maravadu means without forgetfulness. That implies without pramada, without allowing our attention. When we focus our attention on something, if we want to meditate on something, if we want to meditate, for example, on Shiva, and then some other thoughts come, other thoughts come because we've forgotten that our aim is to meditate on Shiva. So Maravadu here, not forgetting, implies not neglecting, not ceasing to investigate ourselves. So in other words, it's referring to not succumbing to pramada, not succumbing to self-negligence. So when the mind investigates itself without forgetting, if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, it will become clear that there's no such thing as mind. Manam enum ondrile. Of course, Bhagavan puts it very succinctly. He says, simply, when one investigates the form of the mind without forgetting, there's not anything called mind. That implies it will become clear, but there's not anything called mind. That manamenum ondrile. There's no such thing as mind at all. Markum ne arkum idundipara. This idu is markum. Markum means path. Ne, direct, but direct path, arkum. Arkum means for everyone, for anyone whomsoever. It means for whomever. So this is the direct path for everyone. Why does Bhagavan call it the direct path? Because what is our aim? Our aim is to know ourselves as we actually are. What is the direct means to know ourselves? If you want to see something, what's a direct way to see it? Is to look at it. If instead of looking at it, you go and ask other people what it is, that's a very indirect way of doing it. So a direct way, if you want to see something, if you're given a book and you want to see what's written in it, what do? You open it up and you look inside. Likewise, if we want to see what we actually are, we need to turn back within and look in deep inside ourselves to see what we actually are. That is what Bhagavan is saying. So this is the direct path, because we are directly attending to that to which we want to know. If you want to see something, you have to look at it. So looking at something is the direct way to see it. There's no other way to see it. Anything else is only indirect. You can take you can ask someone to take a photograph, you can look at the photograph, but you're not actually seeing the thing. You're only seeing a photograph of it. So if you want to see something directly, if you want to see it as it is, you have to look at it. So in order to see ourselves as we actually are, we have to look at ourselves. That is why Bhagavan says this is the direct path. Some people nowadays talk about direct paths in plural. How come between 2 points, point A and point B, there can only be one direct path? The straight line is the only direct path. So nair means not only direct, it also means straight. It also means straightforward, honest. This is the honest path. Because why should we go beating around the bush? When our aim is to know ourselves, we should investigate ourselves. We shouldn't. There's no need to go in a roundabout way doing mantras and tantras and all these other things. But simple, direct way, our aim is to know ourselves. So how do we know ourselves? By attending to ourselves. That's why Bhagavan says this is the direct path. What he says in the Sanskrit version is more or less the same thing. Manasam tu kim margane krite neva manasam margamajavat. Manasam tu kim means what the mind actually is. Margane krite, that means when investigation is done, what the mind actually is. Margane here means investigation. When investigation is done, what this mind actually is, neva manasam, there's no mind at all. Margam arjavat, that literally means the path because of straightness. That is, the implication of that is, this is the straight path. This is the correct path because this is the straight path. The straightforward way to know ourselves is to attend to ourselves. So this is the correct path because it is the direct path. That's why Bhagavan expresses it like that in Sanskrit. Of course, he's to some extent he's constrained by the poetic meter. That's why it's not an exact translation of the Tamil, but the implication is the same. This is the path. Why is it path? Because of its directness. By its being direct, or from the fact that it is direct, this is therefore the path. So this is, again, like as in the previous verse, this is a very clear description of the practice. We have to turn our attention, the implication of manasam tu kim margane krite, when investigation is done what the mind is, or in doing the investigation what the mind is, it will be clear there's no such thing as mind. How do we do that investigation? How do we investigate the mind? If you want to investigate something, what is the primary tool of any investigation? Observation. If you're investigating something other than yourself, you need the 5 senses. You may need scientific instruments. You may need microscopes or telescopes, or you may need forensic tests or something. There may be so many means by which we investigate things other than ourselves. But even when investigating things other than ourselves, the basic tool we use is observation. Without observation, without attention, we can't know anything. To know ourselves, we don't need the 5 senses. We don't even need the mind. We don't need any instruments. All we need is simply to attend to ourselves. So we can investigate what the mind is only by attending to the mind itself. But when we attend to the mind, as Bhagavan will clarify in the next verse, the mind is made, the term mind is often used as a collective term to refer to the totality of all thoughts. But thoughts are constantly changing. The only constant thought is the thought called I. And in that thought called I is ego. In that thought called I, it is a mixture of chit and jada. What we are investigating is not the chit portion of, sorry, not the jada portion of ego, it's only the chit portion of ego. So in effect, we are attending only to the chitva, what he referred to in the previous verse, chittam atmanaha chitva, the mind darshanam, the mind seeing its own chitva. That is what he refers to here, is investigating what the mind is. So it's only that essential chitva that we are attending to. And this is, because this is the only direct path, this is the correct path. This is the best path of all. And other paths are all roundabout. Ultimately, no other path can lead to the goal. Other paths are useful to the extent to which they lead us to this path. But this path alone is the direct means to reach the goal. Other paths, all other paths are like tributaries. This path is like the Ganga. All other rivers, that is, there's no one river in the world that leads to the ocean. But supposing Ganga is the only river that leads to the ocean, all the other rivers are useful only to the extent that they flow into the Ganga, because only by flowing into the Ganga can the water flow into the ocean. So this is the one path that will enable us to merge in the ocean of Satchidananda, our own real nature. So all other paths are useful to the extent to which they lead us to this path. That's why Bhagavan described in earlier verses. He described in verses 3 to 8 how other paths, how the path of bhakti, all the practices of bhakti, the puja, japa, and dhyana, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. By purifying the mind, it enables us to recognize that God is not something out there, something other than ourselves. God is what is shining in our heart as I. So it's only by meditating on God as not other than ourselves, as I alone, but we can know him as he actually is. So the path of bhakti leads to this path of vichara. Likewise, the yoga path, if you, by restraining the breath, you can curb the activity of the mind. But if you merely curb the activity of the mind, you'll end up in laya. So rather than, before you allow the mind to subside in laya, you then need to direct it towards the ekachintana, the thought of the one. Thought of, ekachintana means atmachintana. Or in Tamil, he says, Orvari, the path of investigating. So all other paths are useful only to the extent that they lead to this path. If they don't lead to this path, if we go from some tangent, for example, seeking siddhis or all sorts of, I mean, people have all sorts of goals in life. If we seek any other goal than the annihilation of ego, we get diverted. But if we are sincere about seeking the annihilation of ego, this path is the only means. So all the other paths are useful only to the extent to which they lead us to this path. This is the direct path. Or because this is the direct, because of its straightness, this is the path. Bhagavan expresses it very, very emphatically here. This is the path because of its straightness. Are there any questions anyone would like to ask on that?
So we have a question on YouTube
Yes.
from Mr. Vignesh Nagarajan,
Yes.
and I shall read the question. Quote,
Yes.
can we say anything other than consciousness is karma? Unquote.
Consciousness is karma. That's karma means action. Who is the doer of action and the experience of the fruit of action? It is only ego. Ego, that is pure consciousness, consciousness in its pure form, doesn't do anything. The nature of consciousness is not doing, but just being. That is why it's called Sat-Chit. So the real consciousness never does anything. But doing is done by ego. Ego does actions because we rise as ego by taking ourselves to be this body. I am this body. That false awareness, I am this body, is ego. This body means, as Bhagavan says, the body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. So, or any actions of any of these 5 sheaths, or we usually talk about 3 instruments of actions: body, that mind, speech, and body. So in this context, the mind includes the 3 of the 5 sheaths: the Manamaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. These collectively form the mind in this context. Speech it involves the body. We cannot speak without using our voice. So it's a bodily action, but it's expressing the thoughts of the mind. So speech is something in between body and mind, and the body, the action of body. So because we experience this body as ourself, whatever actions are done by this body, meaning including the mind, are experienced by us as actions done by me. I am thinking, I am seeing, I am hearing, I am touching, I am tasting, I am, I like this, I dislike that. So all these, all the actions of the mind and the intellect and the will are all experienced by us as I am alive, I am breathing, my heart is beating. So we identify with all these things. So that is identifying with the pranamaya kosha. I am speaking, I am expressing my opinion. That is we are identifying with the speech. And I am sitting, I am standing, I am walking, I am running. All we identify with the actions of the body. So because of this dehabhimana, we become the doer of action. Because we identify ourselves with this body, we are the doer of actions. And so the doer of all actions is ego. As Bhagavan says in verse 38 of Ulludunapadu, Vinay mudal nam ayin, Vilay payan twipom. If we are the doer of actions, we will experience the resulting fruit. So the doer of action is ego. The experiencer of the resulting fruit is ego. Ego is not pure awareness. Ego is what is called chidabhasa. Chidabhasa means it is a semblance of awareness, a likeness of awareness, because ego has an element of awareness in it, which it borrows from Sat-Chit. But ego is not aware of itself as it actually is. It's not aware of what is real. It's aware of only these appearances, this world, the things that appear, but appear outside. Well, outside means even the thoughts and so on, all outside, everything other than ourselves. So being aware of anything other than ourselves is being aware of what doesn't actually exist, but only what seems to exist. So that is not real awareness. So that is why ego is called chidabhasa. Chidabhasa, we can interpret a bhasa in 2 contexts, in 2 senses. That is, the deeper sense, the more basic sense of a bhasa is a likeness or a semblance. A secondary meaning is a reflection, because when you see when you look in a mirror and see your reflection, you're not seeing yourself, you're seeing a likeness of yourself. You're not seeing your face, you're seeing a likeness of your face. So all reflections are likenesses. So the basic meaning of chidabhasa is a likeness of awareness. It's only for this chidabhasa that there is action and the fruit of action. So karma is only for ego. It is not for the pure awareness I am is ever untouched by action. Not even, as Bhagavan says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, well, there he's talking about God, but God is, what he's referring to there as God is our own real nature, Atma-swarupa, the pure awareness I am, that is ever unaffected by God, by karma. So karma seems to exist only in the view of ego, which is a distorted form, an adjunct-bound form of the original pure consciousness for which there is no action at all. I hope this adequately answers that question. Ultimately, when we know ourselves as we actually are, know ourselves as pure awareness, we will know there's nothing other than ourselves. So in the final analysis, we can say, yes, everything is pure awareness. But so long as we see everything as many things, we are not seeing it as it actually is, because awareness is one and indivisible and immutable. So long as we are seeing multiplicity, we are not seeing ourselves as we actually are. So long as we are seeing change, we are not seeing ourselves as we actually are, because we are ever unchanging. So the state of pure awareness is the state in which we are not aware of anything other than ourselves. And so in that state, there is no karma at all. So karma is quite unlike the nature of consciousness. The nature of consciousness is just being. Karma is doing. But that doing couldn't even seem to exist without being.
Right. Michael, just
yes.
a quick intervention. Mr. Nagarajan's question is phrased as, can we say anything other than consciousness is karma? He is not seeking an explanatory note on whether consciousness is karma, but whether anything other than consciousness is karma. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Okay. There is nothing other than consciousness. Consciousness alone is what is real. But so long as we rise as ego, there seems to be this whole world in which karma and all these things have a place. These are all jada. Bhagavan says in the first verse of Upadesha Undiyar, Upadesha Asaram, karma is jada. What's it in Sanskrit? It is kartarajya prapyade palam, karma kim param, karma tat jadam. So karma is jada. But even the jada things couldn't exist except as consciousness. That is the ultimate reality. But what appears as all these jada objects is only consciousness. But so long as we see jada objects, we are not seeing consciousness as it is. So I hope that answers that. So ultimately, consciousness alone exists. That's why Bhagavan says in Uludunapta in verse 13, jnana mam tane me, oneself who is jnana. Jnana in this context means pure awareness. Oneself who is pure awareness alone is real. Nana bam jnanam ajnanamam. Awareness of multiplicity is ignorance. Even that ignorance doesn't exist independent of oneself who is jnana. So the jada things are appearances. Nothing could appear, no karma or any other jada object could appear except in the view of ego. And ego cannot appear except ego seems to exist, borrows its seeming existence and its seeming awareness from the one real awareness, Satchit. So ultimately, everything is resolved into Satchit. As it said in the Upanishads, it said, all of this is Brahman. Bhagavan clarified that. He said, all of this is ego. Hande, in verse 26 of Uludunapadu, he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. So ego is ego is everything, mean all these things that appear only in the view of ego. So they all depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ego. And ego depends for its semi-existence upon the real existence of pure awareness, Satchit, I am. So ultimately, the ultimate the immediate substance of all things is ego. The substance of ego is only Satchit. So the ultimate substance of all things is only Satchit. So nothing exists other than Satchit. So Satchit is the soul, is what alone actually exists, or everything else is just an appearance. There could be no appearance if there wasn't something that actually exists. That thing that actually exists is only Satchit, the fundamental awareness I am.
Michael, we have another question coming on YouTube from Neera Kashyapji. I shall read the question. Quote,
Yes.
Bhagavan has spoken of meditation as single-minded focus on one thought or form. Can this dissolve the ego? Unquote.
Attending to anything other but, yes, meditation, in the usual sense in which the term meditation is understood, it's focusing on one thought or one form. All forms are thoughts, all thoughts are forms. So whether we say thought or form, it amounts to the same. But that cannot annihilate ego. The only meditation that will annihilate ego is Swarupa Darshanam. That is not meditation on any form or thought, but meditation on our own real nature. So meditating on a form, for example, meditating on a form of God, meditating or a name of God is, for example, if we're meditating on Bhagavan's form, that will certainly purify the mind. But in itself, it will not bring about annihilation of ego. People may say, oh, but it said mere thought of Arunachala will bring about annihilation of ego. It's true. But so long as we are thinking of Arunachala as a form externally, that form will work in our mind to turn our mind back within. It's only by meditating on Arunachala in our heart as I, but ego will be annihilated. That is the deeper meaning of in the first verse of Aksharammalai, Arunachala mena ahameine pava ahateve rarupai Arunachala. That can be interpreted in two senses. That is, the Arunachala mena means as I, as Arunachala. Ahame has a double meaning. If we take aham in the Tamil sense of the word, aham means heart or home or mind. So ahame means those who meditate on you in the heart. But ahame also is a Sanskrit word that means I. So Arunachala mena ahame means who think of you as I in the heart. So that is, if we think of the external form of Arunachala, that external form has a great power to turn our mind back within, as Bhagavan describes very beautifully in verse 10 of Arunachala Patikam. He describes there the soul who thinks of it even once, it will subdue the sheste, the outgoing activity of that mind. It will draw it within to face itself, and it will thereby make it motionless like itself, and it will feed upon that sweet soul as Bali. So if we think of Arunachala as in the name or form of Arunachala, that name and form has a power to turn our mind back within. Likewise, the form of Bhagavan obviously has the same power, because why did Arunachala take on the form of Bhagavan Ramana? Only to tell us to turn our attention back within. So the mind can be destroyed only by self-investigation. Bhagavan says it very clearly in so many ways. I mean, he's made it clear in so many ways. Take, for example, verse 27 of Ulladu. What he says in verse 27 of Ulladu is, Nanudia ullanile, namaduvai ullanile. That means the state in which one exists without I rising is the state in which we exist as that. So in other words, the state in which we don't rise as ego, that is the state in which we are that. We are that means we are Brahman. And then he goes on to say, Nan udikum tanam ade nadamal, nanudia tan irape savadu evan. Without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. And without reaching that annihilation, how to stand in one's own state or the state of oneself in which oneself is that. So the Bhagavan has made it clear in so many ways, but we cannot annihilate ego, or we cannot dissolve ego except by turning our attention back towards ourselves. The reason is very simple. Ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves. That is, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this person. I am such and such person. I am Michael, or I am whoever. So that so long as we're aware of ourselves as a person, we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are. When we're aware of ourselves, in order to destroy ego, because ego is a false awareness of ourselves, we can destroy it. It can be destroyed only by correct awareness of ourselves. So in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to be aware of ourselves. We need to know what we actually are. So we can know what we actually are only by investigating ourselves. By attending to anything else, we don't come to know what we are. If you want to know something, if you want to see something, you have to look at it. If you want to have tattva darshanam, you need to look at tattva. What is tattva? You yourself are tattva, so look at yourself. So the mind will be destroyed only by means of swarupa darshanam. Other forms of darshana, swarupa dhyana, it will be destroyed only by swarupa dhyana, by meditating on ourselves. Because only by swarupa dhyana can you have swarupa darshana, seeing yourself. But meditation on anything other than ourselves may help to purify the mind if it is done with love. With love for God and without seeking if it is action done for the love of God without seeking any fruit. In other words, if it's nishkarmiya karma, if your meditation is a nishkarmiya meditation done for the love of God, that will purify your mind and give you the clarity to understand that ego can be annihilated only by investigating who am I. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
Thank you, Michael. I think that is. Michael, we will have less than about 5 odd minutes now. So yes. You might like to either conclude or...
Yes, I think now is the time to conclude. So today, unless anyone has any other questions, I'll just summarize again what is the essential import of these two verses, 16 and 17. In 16, he's saying the mind knowing its own chitva, thereby being kept back from everything else, from all that is drishya, everything that is seen. So by seeing its own knowingness, we're keeping the mind away from all objects. And that is tattva darshanam, that is seeing what is real. So the implication of this is that in order to know what is real, we need to know ourselves. We need to investigate ourselves. So in this verse 16, he's pointing our attention away from all drishya, we cannot know ourselves by meditating on anything other than ourselves. Is meditating on some some object that is drishya. We are not to meditate on any object. We are to meditate on our own awareness. That is the implication of verse 16, our own form of light, as he says in Tamil. And that alone is the real knowledge. That alone is the tattva darshanam. And verse 16, he's saying, implying much the same thing. That is, that he's pointing to the same practice when he says, when investigation is done, what the mind actually is, how can we investigate the mind? So long as we are investigating thoughts, thoughts are object, they're drishya. So we're not investigating what the mind itself actually is. As he will, next time I'll talk about verse 18. What he says in verse 18 is that though the mind is, the term mind is often used as a collective term to refer to all thoughts, among all those thoughts, the one essential thought, the one basic thought, the first thought is the thought called I, namely ego. That is what we need to investigate. And even in that ego is chit jada granti. It is a conflation of chit and jada. I am this body. So in that mixed awareness, I am this body, what we are to investigate is only the basic awareness, I am. That is what Bhagavan is talking about. So essentially, the path he's describing in verse 16 and in verse 17, it's the same path. So this simple path of self-investigation, turning our attention back towards ourselves, Bhagavan has described in so many ways. But all these various descriptions, they're all pointing at one and the same path. He's pointing us to, but we need to direct our attention back towards ourselves, away from all other things, back towards ourselves to know who am I. This is Bhagavan's path. This is the path. This is the direct and simple and straightforward path that he has shown us. Because it is straight, this alone is the path, is how he concludes, is the implication of the final sentence of 17th verse in Sanskrit. Margam Arjavat. Arjavat is giving a reason. Arjavat literally means from straightness. It implies because of straightness. Because of its straightness, this is the path. So the only, that is, the only way to know ourselves is to investigate ourselves. All other paths, but Bhagavan never criticized any other path. What he's doing in the first 15 verses, he's pointing out the limitations of other paths and showing how they must all, in order to reach the final goal, which is for Bhagavan, moksha, the final goal is only annihilation of ego. In order to achieve the annihilation of ego, the only means is self-investigation. Because only by investigating ourselves can we thereby surrender ourselves. And only when we surrender ourselves will he swallow us entirely. So this Bhagavan is unequivocal in that, but this is the only path. Other paths of meditation, they may be useful up to a certain point. They're useful to the extent to which they purify the mind. But straight means to, those other paths that purify the mind, by purifying the mind, they lead us to this path. That's why he says in verse 3 of Upadesha Undiyar, Gati, but by nishkarmiya karma, but is done for the love of God, purifying the mind, it will show the way to liberation. The way to liberation is this simple path of self-investigation. So all other practices are useful only to the extent to which they point us, they lead us back to this simple path, this straight path of self-investigation. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya. Mr. James, this has again been a very, very insightful session, sir. And
these are core teachings of Bhagavan we're dealing with now, the real essential teachings. So it's not anything I've said, it's what Bhagavan has said.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we shift to the Kendra and start with Akshar Madamalai, I just wanted to reiterate to our devotees, and Michael, this might be a new information for you.
Yes.
Raman Kendra Delhi has now initiated Narayan Seva every first Sunday of the month. This practice shall continue, and devotees are welcome to join, participate, contribute in whichever way or form they may so like. So
that is very good. That Bhagavan was always in Ramanashram.
Ji,
Food was always given freely to everyone.
absolutely.
So that is very much just like Bhagavan shared his teachings freely with everyone. Whatever he had was shared with all. So in the days, even from the Virupakshi days, when they were still living on begged food, in the early days, Bhagavan was begging his own food. In later days, the sadhus who were with Bhagavan, they would go and beg food, they would bring it, and that begged food would be shared equally among all the visitors.
Absolutely.
So whoever, the food was never lacking in Bhagavan's presence.
Very true, sir.
But
Very
the
true.
ultimate food he gives us is the food of jnana.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He gives us food so that to make us give ourselves to him as food. So ultimately, we become food to him.
Very true, very true, sir. And I think it is only Bhagavan's grace that has shown through Delhi Raman Kendra as to now that we are going to continue this very noble and regular practice of Bhagavan. So, thank you, sir. We shall of course meet you again second Sunday of June, and I would now request Narayananji to initiate Akshar Madamalai and Aarti. Namo Ramana.
Recite 14 stanza of Akshar Madamalai. Tarunarunamani Tirinavali Nigar Tarum Aksharamana Magulmalai Tirunadiya Tiru Adiyar Tirumaral Teliya Paravudal Urulaga Karunagaramuni Ramanariyanuva Gainal Soliyadu Gadiyaga அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே அறிவோடும் ஆழ்வார் சிவனுலகு ஆழ்வாரே அருணாச்சலவர் தேற்ற அக்ஷரமண மாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கருள் காப்பாய் அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறாரு அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகம்புகுந்தீர்க்கும் அககுகை சிறையா அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு தாயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி திலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழி தப்புனையே நினைத்தித்தால் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையின் பெரிதல் புரிவோர் இதுவோ புனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचला முனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதி இருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று உளம்பிடாது உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचला என்னை அழித்திப்போல் என்னை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏதிந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறருக்க இது உனக்கழகும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போல் அகத்தில் நீ இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவனா முன்னை ஒளித்தேவர் வருவார் முன்சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓங்கார பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்ல உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா ஔவை போலெனக்கு அருளை தந்து என்னை ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வ தஸ்ஸோதர்வண்யம் भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवी सवितः सत्यं दौर्जन्यं प्रसञ्जामि अमृत स्वं स्वाहा ओम प्राणे स्वाहा आवाने स्वाम व्याने स्वाहा उदाने समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः कार्तिकाय मुरुगावली देवाने नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः उडगंड अन्नदानं कदलीपळं गोशीलं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतपुत्रावसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि पूगीवल समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तलयोर्धं कर्पूर्ण सूर्ण संयुक्तं प्रसिद्धं कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षिकी समर्पयामि ओम नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय नमः कार्तिकाय नमः वरदाय नमः अल्लीदेवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः स्वामिनारायणाय नमः सच्चिदानंदाय नमः नटराजने नमः यो भा पुष्पं वेद भवान् प्रजावान् वस्मान् भवति चन्द्रमा भावान् पुष्पं पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् वस्मान् भवति ओं तद्ब्रह्मा ओं तद्वायु ओं तदात्मा ओं तत्सत्यम् ओं तत् सर्वम् ओं तत्पुराणं तत्तर्हिभूतेषुवायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञस्तं वसंकारस्तं इन्द्रस्तं रुद्रस्तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मस्तं प्रजापति ओं तदा वो ज्योतिर्सोमृतं गुरुस्वरां न कर्मणा न प्रजया जने नित्यानेके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं भुवायं विप्राजते दत्तदयो विसन्ति वेदान्तविज्ञानसे नित्यदार्था संन्यासयोगातदय शुद्धसत्त्वाः ये ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे नरं विभावं परमेस्मभूतं यत्पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्यसकं सदं तत्रावित्तकर्मकगनं विशोकस् तस्मिन्यन्तद्दद्वासित्यं यो वेदान्तोऽस्वरप्रोक्तो वेदान्तस्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं श्रीरमणमहर्षि किं मन्त्रपुष्पं श्री कात्याय मूलावल्लीदेवानित्यं मन्त्रपुष्पं श्रीमन् शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ॐ सद्गुरुब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओं 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 नाशयामि सर्वपापानि जन्मान्तरकृतानि च कार्याणि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रवर्तन पदे पदे
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Mr. Michael James. We shall reconvene next Sunday with Raghavji as part of continuation of 42 verses from Bhagavad Gita. Namo Ramana.